Belgian living in Scotland, hence this very funny accent I have. I'm going to talk to you about how artists have started to map the new north, and I'll talk about that. Right, so mapping a new north. In his book, The New North, The World in 2050, the geographer Laurence Smith outlined a global shift north. The 4 key megatrends of projected population growth and migration, increased demand for natural resources, globalization, and accelerated climate change will tilt the political and economic axis of the world radically to the north. Increased drought in equatorial regions of the world and increased temperatures thawing the Arctic regions are making access and exploration of resources such as oil and gas potentially much more viable, and thus making the north an attractive migration proposition. Smith calls the 8 countries identified in this new north as the Norks, the 8 northern rim countries of Canada, the northern United States, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Finland, and Russia. The region outlined represent much of the Boreal forest. Boreal represents 29% of the world's forest cover, and its carbon bank stores 22% of all carbon stored on the Earth's land surface, much of it in peatland. The global warming trend threatens to transform the boreal forest area into grassland, parkland, and or temperature forest, introducing a significant shift in species of both plants and animals. Canada still has 91% of the forest cover that existed at the beginning of the European settlement. Conversely, only 5% of the boreal in Scandinavia remains. For the first time in over 20 years of UN negotiations, the COP21, also known as the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, aimed to achieve a legally binding and universal agreement on climate, with the aim of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. The summit in Paris agreed on the 12th of December for all nations rich and poor to pledge action on climate change, with the stated aim of restricting global warming to well below 2 degrees, above pre-industrial levels, and to strive to limit it to 1.5 degrees. However, scientists have agreed that halting global warming to less than 2 degrees would be disastrous, as it will lead to more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and dramatic changes in climate, affecting flora and fauna and human life profoundly. The nascent shift north, as outlined above, is already taking shape with the increased exploration of gas, oil and shale in the northern and Arctic regions. The most famous of these is the Alberta tar sands project in the Boreal forest of Canada. The US Department of Energy reported that the tar sands production generates as much as 20% more carbon emissions than conventional crude. James Hansen, the former NASA climate chief, has said that if mining expands as planned, it's essentially game over for the planet. An article published in Nature magazine in January 15 conceded that in order to meet the climate change target of 2 degrees, which the Paris summit agreed was a target which would not negate climate change but merely stop it in its tracks, 80% of the world's coal is unburnable and needs to stay in the ground in order to avoid dangerous climate change. 30% of known oil and 50% of gas reserves are unburnable, and drilling in the Arctic is out of the question if we are to stay well below 2 degrees. That means Canada tar sands and the 100 million barrels of oil estimated to exist in the Arctic would need to go untouched, the paper explains. So how could we visualise the new north as envisioned by Smith? Clearly the exploration of coal, shale and gas in the northern and Arctic region has increased already. However, the 6 intervening years since the publication of the book have also seen a significant shift in public opinion, and therefore, hopefully, an increased political will to address climate change. The use of maps and mapping techniques in the lexicon of contemporary visual art occurred at the point of arrival of postmodernism in the aftermath of the Second World War and the reconsideration of the values of modern era. Both cartographers and art critics have witnessed a rise in cartographic language and visual idiom within the visual arts practice. Journalist and writer Catherine Harman defines it as symptomatic of the postmodern era, where all conventions and rules are circumspect. cartographers Dennis Wood and Dennis Cosgrove have been particularly key in raising and examining the role of cartography within broader critical discourses about landscape, culture and art. And whilst the mapping instinct has been evidenced in archaeological maps since the rise of the agricultural settled lifestyle, as we heard earlier, map knowledge does not come to us naturally, but through complex cultural understanding. Each map speaks of its time and the value of its culture. Understanding the historical provenance and the rationale of maps to claim territories, mark property, or denote political boundaries make maps potent tools of power. Wood dissected the map not as an impartial neutral tool, but as a biased, active and potent agent, and artists have been particularly astute in challenging the perceived neutrality of the map. Artists have explored a subversive use of the powerful semiotics of cartography more noticeably since the 1960s. That mapping became much more pronounced during the land art movement is no coincidence, as it was part of a broader shift in artistic practice by moving art out of the gallery and into the landscape itself. The expanded field, as defined by Krauss in 1979, described both arts practice and theory with ideas which are traditionally geographical terms, notions of space, place, and site. Curator Nato Thompson observed in his book Experimental Geography in 2008 that the notable increase of artists working within the field, described as experimental geography, operate on an expansive grade within the poetic didactic on one axis and the geological urban as another. As we will see in the case studies described later, the role of the didactic and poetic in invoking a sense of place, often at a micro level, are juxtaposed with projects dealing with a larger context of the urban, industrial, or even entire countries. Thompson noted in his recent book, Seeing Power, 2015, that artists with an activist agenda using mapping methodologies increasingly do so in their own locale. I quote here, concomitant with the rise of locally rooted artworks came a renewed interest in the geographic. Hybrid forms took the spatial compositions of urbanism as a site of investigation, while the geographic gave up on theories that focused on language and semiotics and turned to the studies of the realities that existed in the cities that we live in. Smith describes in his book the culture shock of returning home after many months spent in the Arctic, having experienced a landscape devoid of people, and makes the salient point. To experience true northern solitude is both spooky and thrilling, like being time-warped to another planet without us. The question is, how many more years things will remain like this? The cultural geographer Tim Creswell considered art as the practice of dwelling in and on earth, and asks then how artists engage with a world in motion, one in which borders are arguably becoming less important. The case studies discussed in this paper do not focus on the urban, instead charting broader investigations in both rural and urban environments, with a focus on the rural, which is bearing the most visible and immediate impact of climate change. The Arctic is like the canary in the coal mine. The region is providing scientists with vital information on climate change through the measured rates of polar ice melts, such as the satellite images recorded by NASA, or the detailed site surveys of the British Antarctic Survey. Antarctic ice cores demonstrate that the concentration of CO2 was stable over the last millennium until the early 19th century, after which time it started to rise, and its concentration is now nearly 40% higher than it was before the Industrial Revolution. Ironically, the melting ice is therefore also losing vital information for future generations. The receding ice is exposing land previously covered by permafrost, thus significantly altering the visual landscape of the parts in the Arctic region. The distinctive landscapes of the Arctic region certainly made its presence felt in the Norse sagas, which took a dark, apocalyptic view of the world and the human place within it. But I'm sure there's more expert people in the audience. Perhaps then this distinctive northern culture is a good starting point to look at how culture might engage with the largest threat to face humankind since civilizations began, arguably. Case studies from the Northern Rim countries will highlight how contemporary artists are engaged not only with the notion of north, but also the act of actively recording the changes, mapping out the new territories and visualising the change at both human and geographical level. Included are several examples from Scotland, which are not part of the geographical north as outlined by Smith, but on the periphery of the Northern Rim, and as an example of a culture influenced and shaped historically by its northern neighbours, and one which frequently cites the Scandinavian countries as a role model for its newfound identity. The Scottish design collective Lateral North described it as such. You might not think that Scotland is an immediate part of the Arctic. However, it is affected by it, and we are contributing to it now, and will be in the future. What happens in the world now affects Scotland, affects the Arctic, which affects Scotland and affects the world. We need to see change, and we see change now. We are part of the problem, but we are also part of the solution. So to the case studies. The American artist Eva Mosher, which I might have mentioned yesterday in the talk, High Water Line project started in New York City in 2007, making climate change both visible and tangible. She states that she was struck by both the inactivity on the issue of climate change on account of the politicians and an active editing of the science by the Bush administration from the US climate change science program on what was a pressing issue. And yet, with her understanding of the power of a visual story, Mosher drew a contour line around the edge of the Brooklyn borough. The line drawn is 10 feet above sea level and was based on scientific modelling of predicted rising sea levels due to climate change, causing increased flood risk. By walking and drawing the line, Mosher hoped to engender dialogue. She says, "I wanted to leave this visual interesting mark to open up space for conversation." Mosher turned this project subsequently into a toolkit and has been employed in sites around the world, such as Philadelphia and Miami, and in Bristol in the UK, presented by arts organisation Invisible Dust. Not only did this project make the high water line very visible and tangible in the cityscape, but it also made it a very human story, a social aspect of the project, where engagement with communities on the ground affected by the flood risks both made the line visible and also informed the process in the project. This in turn provided real-life data back to the scientists and, more importantly, to policymakers to effect effective change. Testament to the success of the project are not only the spin-off projects across the world and the development of a toolkit, but more crucially in the making abstract scientific data visible and accessible to people, and in turn empowering them to engage with it in a meaningful way and effect positive and proactive change, both at a practical and strategic level. The Canadian photographer Louis Helbig recorded the vast changes of the Canadian landscape in the Alberta province by the tar sand exploration in his book Beautiful Destruction in 2014. The images in this glossy coffee table book are hauntingly beautiful, but visceral in the unflinching record of the destructions it records. The project was made possible via a crowdsourcing campaign, and the subsequent book also detailed 16 essays by First Nation campaigners, journalists, environmental campaigners such as Bill McKibben, politicians and industrialists. As such, the book maps effectively not only the changing geographical landscape through aerial photography, but also the myriad of relationships and interests which affect the landscape of the boreal forest in Canada. Marlene Creets is another Canadian artist who's been investigating a 6-acre patch of the boreal forest on the outskirts of Portugal Cove, a fairly rural coastal community in Newfoundland since 2002, mapping its landscape slowly through poetry and art. She says, "I'm slowly tuning my body and my reflexes to its details. I'm coming to know this habitat by engaging with it in various ways, corporally, emotionally, intellectually, instinctively, linguistically, and in astonishment." She calls her practice landscape literacy. In her recent project, Brickle, Niche and Nobbly, a Newfoundland treasury of terms for ice and snow, Creets made an inventory of snow and ice words and then photographed real-world illustrations in Conception Bay and Blast Hole blast hole pond near where she lives. Like artifacts in a museum, she preserves these words and displays them for future generations. What goes unnamed largely goes unseen, says Creeds. Knowing the terms helps us actually see different phenomena instead of winter just being just a cold white blur. She noted that recent studies in linguistics have found correlations between geographic factors and the shape of sound patterns in human language. I've had an inkling that there was something like this going on, but to have it confirmed, but never had it confirmed until recently. Creeds had been making memory maps for many years, making assemblages of mental maps and individual recollections of places, infusing the landscape with profoundly personal and localized meanings. Creed works carries on in the tradition of land art of the British artists Robert Long and Hamish Fulton, who started walking the map and mapped the walk as their arts practice in the late 1960s, and for whom language is a key part of their practice. Yet climate change is also paradoxically having a positive effect on the boreal forest, where an influx of CO2 appears to be affecting the ecosystems, changing how much carbon is allocated to different structures such as leaves, woods or roots, changing their extent or composition. Creed's recent work is charting these imperceptible small changes occurring in the microenvironment that she works in. The American artist Adrian Colburn's recent work consists of large-scale installations that investigate the complex relationships between human infrastructure, earth systems, technology, and the natural world. These works, derived from scientific data, images and videos collected through research and while participating in scientific expeditions, look at how mapping is used to investigate fragile and inaccessible ecosystems along the edges of the Earth's last vestiges of wilderness. She says, at the core of all my work is a fascination with the way that our attempts to make sense of the world around us through maps, data and pictures results in abstractions that are simultaneously informative, formless and utterly ambiguous. For this work, a wall installation of the North Pole is combined with an image of the shifting and shrinking contours of the Arctic ice sheet, with the encroachment of oil exploration and territorial divisions and the current geopolitical manoeuvring that has been inspired by the melting of the Arctic ice sheet and the UN Treaty, the Law of the Sea. The use of the stereographic map projection of the Arctic region projects the northern sphere onto a circular plane. This unusual view of the world from the North Pole and the way territories converge and radiate out from this point makes the viewer look at the world from the new northern perspective. Dark Ecology is a 3-year art, research and commissioning project initiated by the Dutch Sonic Acts and Norwegian curator Hilda Methi, and in collaboration with Norwegian, Russian and other European partners, started in 2014 and due to finish this year. Its concept was informed by philosopher Timothy Morton's idea that ecology is dark because it invites or demands what we think of our because it invites or demands that we think about our intimate interconnectedness with, for instance, iron ore, snowflakes, plankton or radiation. Though these issues are relevant anywhere in the world, they're especially pertinent in the Barents region with its pristine nature, industrial pollution and open-pit mining. Speculation on global warming fuels local economic growth as the prospects for both the exploration of oil and gas reserve below the Barents Sea and the trade through the Northern Sea routes are rising. Disparate interests and approaches from both sides of the border have to negotiate. This interaction informs the Dark Ecology project and is a starting point to invite artists and theorists to develop new approaches and new works. In 2015, the program commissioned the nickel materiality map by the Russian architects and urban designers Tatyana Garbochevskaya and Katya Larina, and illustrates the idea of dark ecology through thematic maps and catalogues of artifacts that have emerged from nickel's symbiosis between the natural environment and alienated materials created by human culture. The town of Nickel in Russia, only 7 kilometers from the Norwegian border, took its name from the huge reserves of nickel ore found in the nearby fells in the 1930s. The town is twinned with Kirkenes in Norway. The two towns are the twin venues for the Dark Ecology project. The project records the story of Nickel as that of a place that is transformed the natural environment, seeming no longer dependent on its geographical, geological or atmospheric attachments to the earth, and it argues that nickel could have been anywhere in the world. The materiality of the artificial organism of the city started to interact directly with the natural conditions of the unique Arctic climate and ecosystem. Nickel's artificial materiality was forced to adapt to survive. The map produced details the energy infrastructure, the evidence of pollution, and the adaptations made by nature to reclaim territory. Each detailed map paired with photographs of the location itself. In addition to the map produced, a talk and a conceptual walking tour through the city were also presented.
You're fine, because we've got plenty of time.
Okay. The Dark Ecology project forms part of a broader changing network whose ethos of networked responses to geophysical, geopolitical and technological culture shifts across Europe has encompassed a myriad of cultural activity across the region. It was initiated in partnership with the Arctic Perspective Initiative, established by Canadian artist Matthew Biederman and Slovenian artist Marko Pelijan in 1992. As circumpolar regions become more affected by climate change, the IPA project sought to find means of enabling local communities to collect their own data and as such empowering them to frame their own research questions using free and affordable tools to study and improve their own environment through participatory sensing, monitoring and modelling activities. The Arctic Perspective Initiative, like High Waterline Project, are projects driven by artists and which have developed tangible tools for communities to become articulate and resilient in the face of climate change. The role of the artist as such can be described not just to give a voice to the local communities, but to give them tools by which to articulate those themselves, and empowering them to take charge and develop strategies by which to build resilience. Climate change is perhaps not as visible in Scotland as it is in the landscape of the Arctic, where the increased exploitation of its resources in the melting ice have given rise to dramatic images. Scotland, as the gateway to the north, however, is like any country in the world, experiences changes in its climate, and here too artists have recorded, discussed and envisioned changes to the climate and the land in different ways. Orkney and Shetland have historical links to Scandinavia and retain strong cultural relationships to its northern neighbours. Working the map, Islanders and a Changing Environment is a project by artist John Cumming and poet Morag McInnes, portraying the Orkney Isles and the subtle changes in its wildlife and flora caused by environmental changes attributed to climate change. This multi-layered project was collated into this small book and detailed delicate little drawings of wildlife found on the island, interspersed with stories collected locally from scientists, fishermen, crofters, poets and artists on the subtle changes they have observed, contrasted with historical written accounts on the same landscape, reminding us that only by working the map together, apologies for appalling accent, can we determine the true value of places and their tangible and intangible resources. This project was supported by Cape Farewell, a think-do tank started in 2001 by artist David Buckland, named after the southernmost point of Greenland and based in London. It's been developing arts projects focused on climate change with the specific aim to bring about a cultural change. Climate change is a reality caused by us all. It is a cultural, social and economic problem and must move beyond scientific debate. Cape Farewell is committed to the notion that artists can engage the public in this issue through creative insight and vision. This is Cape Farewell statement. Since 2003, Cape Farewell have led 8 expeditions to the Arctic, 2 to the Scottish Highlands and 1 to the Peruvian Andes, taking creatives, scientists, educators and communicators to experience the effects of climate change firsthand. And we have one witness sitting right there. By physically sailing to the heart of the debate, Cape Farewell aims to draw people's attention to the effects of ocean currents on us and our climate. As well as working the map project with John Cumming, the American artist Adrian Colburn has also travelled with them, and more collaborations will be discussed further. Mapping the Sea, Barra, 2014, is a video installation by artist Stephen Hurrell, commissioned by Cape Farewell in 2014 as one of the 100 generation artists selected to celebrate 25 years of contemporary art in Scotland to coincide with the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. Mapping the Sea, Barra, forms part of a trilogy of films titled The North Sea Hitch, showcased at the Timespan Museum in Helmsdale in Sutherland in 2014. The Mapping the Sea was developed initially as an online digital map so that the many layers of cultural knowledge can be stored, accessed and shared in a visually interesting, interactive format, and draws on local knowledge of uncharted coastal and maritime topography around Barra. It was conceived as a means of bringing to life and making visible what is often invisible to most people. It was a follow-up to the 2012 project, which I can't pronounce, Duchas na Mara, Belonging to the Sea, with social ecologists Rue Brennan and Ian McCunnon from the Scottish Crofting Federation and Barra fishermen. This research project collected stories and explored the roots of maritime conflict over fisheries and marine conservation on Gaelic-speaking islands, with translations by Roddy Gorman. The document concludes, our research suggests that at the heart of these beliefs and conduct is a particular Gaelic expression of a feeling that is universally potential in human beings, the sense of belonging to a home place and of responsibility for that place. In the Gaelic context, this feeling, described by the great Scottish Gaelic scholar John McInnes as a form of emotional energy, is encapsulated by the not easily translatable word duchas in Irish or duchas in Scottish Gaelic. The creative partnerships between Brennan and Hurrell was sparked by Cape Farewell Scottish Islands expedition in 2011, and they continue to work together on projects. The Scottish Research and Design Collective, Lateral North, was selected to be part of the emerging leaders in the Arctic region as part of the Arctic Frontiers Conference taking place in Tromsø in Norway in January this year, to present its Possible Scotland project, a travelling roadshow taking place in 50 locations throughout Scotland, although I think they've scaled that down to 7. Lateral North has made 2 further projects in the last 2 years with explicit use of maps and mapping to explore possible new visions of Scotland within the context of a new North. The architecture and design practice has been selected to represent Scotland with the Prospect North project, which will be exhibited at the Venice Biennale in June 2000 this year. It will return to Scotland for a nationwide tour as part of this year's Scotland's Year of Innovation, Architecture and Design. The exhibition explores Scotland's and its relationship alongside its northern neighbours with a focus on people and place. They are also involved in this project, the branding for 58 Degrees North, a project which is currently being developed by the Timespan Museum and Art Centre in Helmsdale in Sutherland, in the far northern region of the Scottish Highlands. The project is investigating the relationship between 7 villages along the 58-degree North Line, 2 villages from Scotland, Helmsdale on the east coast, Lochinvar on the west, the village in Borghaug and Lillesand in the south of Norway, Hadameste in Estonia, Churchill on the east coast of Canada, and Huna in Alaska make up the 7 villages who all share the 58 degrees circle of latitude. The ambition of this modern pilgrimage around the globe is an investigation into the northern identity and learning from creative communities with whom they share the same latitude. The project relies on community engagement from the constituents' parts across the globe in the creation of photospheres, scenic photographs capturing 360 degrees panoramas and embedding them into Google Maps. The project is being supported by Open Virtual World at the University of St Andrews with technical support. It's at an embryonic stage and is being developed, but it will be interesting to see how it might tease out a cultural identity from 7 remote villages. Can such a small sample be sufficient to tease out a visual northern identity? The fact that the question is being asked signals both an increased introspection in what continues contemporary Scottish culture in the context of North and its relationship to its northern neighbours, a question worth asking in the nascent shift north as outlined by Smith. Okay, just wanted to mention one more, the Atlas of Productivity, also bilateral north, which they made in the context of a discussion of Scotland in the referendum debate. And I think it's a really good project because it was kind of looking at the whole idea of energy generation, all the resources of Scotland. Yeah, I can talk a lot more, but I'll just yeah. Yes, that was geolocations of climate change, and that was another commission by Cape Farewell, specifically in the context of ArtCon, which is the cultural festival around climate change. So yeah. Thank you so much. I have this for people to look at.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, the 50 Degrees North looks very interesting. I just wondered if you'd come across Malachy Talak's book 60 Degrees North, which was Book of the Week in Radio 4 about 3 or 4 months ago.
Okay, 60 degrees.
60 Degrees North, yeah. And he...
What's his name?
Malachy Talak. He's from Shetland. And he went round 60 degrees north to Greenland and Siberia and various places.
It's a book.
And wrote his experiences up.
All right. No, I didn't know that.
If it might fit into the
Yes,
discussion.
You may be doing this already, we didn't quite gather, but there was a very interesting school project run from Bedfordshire which linked schools in Britain, California, India, and they worked on simultaneously on the same project. And when you finished at 4 o'clock in Britain, you sent it to California, which sent it to India. So by the time you came back to school at 9 o'clock the next day, it had been worked on all around the world. And the purpose was to create a sort of global village sense.
Okay.
And also to model financial markets, to try to convey to children how money is always on the move in this global financial world we live in. It could apply to this project, and perhaps it's something they're doing already, but I think that doing it in real time was particularly powerful the way it worked.
There's a really interesting mapping project by a Danish artist who lives in the UK called Lisa Otogina, and she made an amazing map based on live data from the stock market. So she made a constellation of live market data, so that would light up as markets would wake up across.
Nottinghamshire used to send, Northamptonshire used to send all its bank balance at 5 o'clock to Japan, and got it back with a bit of interest at 9 o'clock when they opened the business the following day. It's very difficult to get a handle
on that. Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting and such an amazing variety of stuff. What I was just wondering was, is anybody looking at the impact of all of these and whether, are they actually an exhibition, it's somewhere that everybody goes to and says that's great and then forgets about, or is it actually leading to more action or concerted change or schools projects and things?
No, not that I'm aware, but I'm only in year 2. I've got 3 more years to
Yeah,
fill.
no, sorry, I wasn't meaning you personally, but it is really interesting to see what everything's being done. So unless it leads to something, it's just stimulating, not impactful somehow.
Well, you know, if what they're saying, you know, like Cape Farewell is affecting a culture change, that's not going to happen overnight. And I think, no, I mean, look, there's particularly within the field of geography. I'm going to deliver a paper at the end of August at the Royal Geographical Society, and there's a lot, especially within human geography. There's lots of interest within that. So there are kind of disparate. I mean, there are projects looking at it, but quite often through particular subjects. So whether it's water, investigations of water, or current topic is peatlands. There's a lot of artists dealing with peatlands at the moment.
Because otherwise you might just describe it as a sort of Armageddon art, that we're, you know, a bit like the fall of the Roman Empire, that we're actually just documenting our downfall in a massive creative outburst rather than actually trying to do something about it.
Yeah, and the question is also, is it any good? Is it any good as art? That's also the question.
That doesn't worry me. What worries me is whether or not it's going to lead to any improvement.
We're going to save the world.
Yes, yes. I'm quite happy to go with art being in the eye of the beholder.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
I want action.
I'll just pick up on what you're saying. I mean, I suppose the art thing is that if the art is good, maybe good's the wrong word, if it's connecting and impacting, I know good can be ambiguous, what does good mean, but if it's impacting and connecting, then that message is continuing. You talked about the toolkits and so forth for communities, and that could have an impact and connection beyond what it does. But I was just going back to the art, Inge, and is there any inclusion at some point, you think, for sort of what you might call, I don't know how you would, Indigenous peoples, First Nations types of art in that as well, because that could be quite informing as well, I'd imagine.
I haven't found any yet, but yes, I haven't got. Yeah, I would like to, but from what I've found so far, I haven't found any yet. So if you know of any, do let me know. Yeah. So totally, because I'm quite aware that especially in the
I suppose that's
North Scandinavia.
it's becoming a bit tougher to find, I would imagine. It's not so accessible. But you think that the sort of groups of people that are living in these areas might be passed down and so forth, and of course they might witness the changes most of all in these
They
areas.
are, and a lot of, particularly I think in Canada, they've been at the forefront of kind of, you know.
There's a very good Alaskan book called The World Moves Faster Now. It's not about art, it's about hunting, but it brings out very clearly the notion that the greater unpredictability of climate is what they find very difficult. It used to be that you could always catch the same things in mid-April. To be simplistic about it, and that's no longer true. It's quite difficult.
I've read quite a lot of the kind of exploring books, some of the early books, and you find lots of some of the explorers that did make connections with indigenous peoples, they do very well. So although it's not specifically about art, but you find through their voyages by canoes and stuff like that, and that can tell a lot by what happened and the changes they discovered by their hunting for seals and things like that. You discover the changes in these landscapes, which although are not strictly art, but they could definitely inform about some of the changes happening in these areas.
Yes.
Just on the question of its status as art, I mean, does this group of projects fall under a particular label art historically?
Well, as I said, it kind of follows in that tradition of the land art movement, which started in the 60s, and certainly the kind of what I like to label the mapping artists. There's either those who work kind of within a natural environment, but there's also a lot of mapping artists working in an urban context. I would say it kind of fits within that banner of what Krauss called the expanded field. It's not gallery work. Not a lot of it is created outside, not necessarily in the studio, and is quite often created in collaboration with others. So a lot of these projects involve working closely with scientists, for instance, or with communities and all communities. So, and I think there's definitely a shift, I think, within art discourse about the kind of reevaluation of what we would have called socially engaged art. And so there's definitely a shift happening there, and I think it's partly part of that conversation as well, as in what's the value of that, and is it any good as well. But so that's the kind of system that exists outside of the gallery in that commercial system, if that's an answer.
Sure, yeah. I mean, does the theorising around that kind of umbrella term include questions of its practical effect in terms of people, right, cultural attitudes or shifts of...
Not that I'm aware of.
No? Right,
It might be.
I
I might be wiser at the end.
What's that?
I might be wiser at the end of it. And as I said, I'm hoping there'll be some kind of interesting dialogues happening at the Royal Geographical Society conference in August. There's lots of things happening around that.
But insofar as it has some kind of unintended effect, I suppose the impact on audiences would
How would you measure?
perhaps be part of how any form of art is considered, and its impact on an audience that's not an art audience, but the world, as it were.
Yeah. How would you measure it?
Well, you know, I mean, it's not a matter of measuring it, perhaps,
Yeah.
just well, I mean, sort of making statements in which they were arguing. I just wondered whether that was part of it.
No, I think and I've certainly been having conversations with that, like there's creative carbon exists in Edinburgh, and they're trying to kind of stimulate that debate around that. But yeah, I don't know is the answer.
But you're looking at visual arts.
Yes.
Is
I am.
anyone doing a similar thing with other arts, like music or the spoken word or anything? 'Cause
Well,
there's a lot of other artistic responses.
There is,
potentially
yes,
out
and
there.
I'm certainly within the sort of eco-arts field or section of the arts, if you like, that there is that kind of layered responses, whether that's, certainly a lot of the artists one of the case studies I'm looking at is working with Tweed, and that was a visual artist, a choreographer, a music person, and a writer. So there were kind of 4 different disciplines looking at that.
Because Sea Island, they had you maybe know more about this last term. They had a sort of festival of, yeah.
Which one,
There's
sorry?
a guy there who's a poet who I met, and he'd been to Orkney or something, but he had some sort of whole festival about climate, environmental change and artistic responses to it. A little one on Sea Island, and he was saying he was going to have another one.
But there is quite a few organisations kind of, doing, as I said, there's Invisible Dust and King Ferrell, probably the 2 most prominent platform in London as well.
And Laura Watts, she's writing stories that are, and she's an ethnographer and poet. If you haven't come across Sarah.
Well, I would argue, I think
But
that...
she's stories and poetry, so I don't know if your PhD is visual arts, then it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have the impression, it's just an instinctive impression I have, that I think perhaps within the literature, there's been perhaps a more pronounced engagement with it than within visual art. But maybe that's my, I can't back that up. It's just an instinctive feeling that I have.
Well, we, as we only have the 2 speakers, we are ended a bit early. The next item on the agenda is lunch.